With shows like Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, George R.R. Martin is used to high ratings, but in The Lost Lands, a new movie based on one of his short stories, has an atrocious score on Rotten Tomatoes. In The Lost Lands is a post-apocalyptic action movie that takes place years after a war destroyed most of the world. The film follows Gray Alice, who hires a guide named Boyce to accompany her into the dangerous Lost Lands to retrieve a power. Milla Jovovich and Dave Bautista lead the cast of In the Lost Lands, and the film is directed by Paul W.S. Anderson. Even though In the Lost Lands has an intriguing premise and is based on a short story by George R.R. Martin, the film has not been received well by critics. Reviews for In the Lost Lands have been terrible, and Screen Rant's own Alexander Harrison gave the movie a score of 2 out of 10. So, here's why the Rotten Tomatoes score for In the Lost Lands is so low. In the Lost Lands has a 17% on Rotten Tomatoes. Why it's so low? Critics have been bashing In the Lost Lands. The latest effort from Anderson has received an extremely low Rotten Tomatoes score of 17% via Rotten Tomatoes. Critics seem to unanimously agree that there are almost no redeeming qualities in this supposedly lifeless action movie. In Screen Rant's review of In the Lost Lands, it is noted that Bautista actually delivers a decent performance, but the acting decisions Jovovich makes throughout the movie are very confusing, which is a huge problem since she is meant to be the heart of the film. Beyond the acting, critics have also criticized In the Lost Lands for being a very ugly movie. In their review of the film, IndieWire described In the Lost Lands as an eyesore of a film that is so ugly and confusing to look at. Additionally, in their review, The Hollywood Reporter claims that In the Lost Lands has a painfully muddy color scheme. Therefore, based on these reviews and many others, it is clear that In the Lost Lands is not a good time at all. How In the Lost Lands Rotten Tomatoes stacks up with Milla Jovovich and Dave Bautista's other movies. Paul W.S. Anderson has many critically panned movies. It is not necessarily surprising that Bautista is potentially the only good thing about In the Lost Lands, since he has starred in several critically acclaimed films and has proven that he's a talented actor. Bautista has starred in both Dune movies, Blade Runner 2049, and the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy, which all have amazing reviews. However, among these hits, Bautista has also starred in some critically panned movies, such as both My Spy movies, and most recently, The Killer's Game. It seems like In the Lost Lands will easily become one of the worst reviewed movies of his career. Meanwhile, Jovovich is unfortunately more used to starring in poorly reviewed films. She has teamed up with Anderson on numerous occasions, and is actually married to him. Their most recent movie together, Monster Hunter, has a 44% on Rotten Tomatoes, via Rotten Tomatoes. Additionally, every Resident Evil movie they made together has a rotten score on the review aggregator. Therefore, even though it is disappointing that In the Lost Lands ratings are so low, it is not necessarily surprising given Jovovich and Anderson's previous movies.